California is paving the way for unprecedented reparations for African Americans. A state task force recommended monetary compensation and an apology. Some residents could receive payments over $1 million. Xavier Walton explains where this goes next.
In 2023, the unthinkable happened. California's reparations task force proposed giving eligible black residents up to $1.2 million each as repayment for centuries of slavery, segregation, redlining, and systemic theft. Not just symbolic justice, real money, life-changing money. Suddenly what had been mocked as impossible became a headline, backed by data, economists, and historical precedent. The proposal sent shockwaves across America. But here's the catch. It's not federal, not national, only in California. That means over 90% of black Americans, the descendants of enslaved people who built this country, get nothing. And even in California, not everyone qualifies. The plan is only for those who can trace ancestry to American slavery. That leaves millions excluded, despite sharing the same generational scars. Still, the $1.2 million number was a spark. For many, it was the first time they saw a government body admit that the debt is real, that we're not just owed an apology, we're owed an invoice. And when you break it down, $1.2 million doesn't even come close to what was stolen. Let's be honest, $1.2 million sounds huge until you do the math. Slavery wasn't just a tragedy, it was a business, a global empire powered by blackbacks. By 1860, the value of enslaved black people in America was over $3 billion, more than the value of all banks, railroads, and factories combined. In today's money, that's over $100 trillion. That's what was stolen. Not just wages, generational wealth, time, language, dignity, futures, no pensions, no inheritances, no retirement, just pain, passed down. And after emancipation, the theft didn't stop. No 40 acres, no mule. Instead, black Americans were thrown into sharecropping, Jim Crow, redlining, and a prison system built to re-enslave under new names. So when someone says, why 1.2 million? Ask them, why not more? $1.2 million isn't a handout, it's a down payment. It's what's owed from the biggest robbery in human history. Every corporation that profited off slave labor, every university that grew rich off stolen bodies, every government institution that blocked black advancement, they owe. This is not about charity, it's about settling the tab. Let's talk about taxes. How do you tax the people you've robbed for centuries? Black Americans have paid into this system with our labor, our bodies, our taxes. And what did we get back? Not schools, not safe neighborhoods, not equity. We funded our own oppression. Let that sit for a second. Black taxpayers helped build highways to suburbs we were banned from. We helped pay for police who over-police our communities. We helped fund public schools that white America abandoned the moment we moved in. Our tax dollars went to housing projects they later tore down and urban renewal that meant black removal. We've been paying twice. Once through stolen wealth, again through taxes. And here's the kicker. White slave owners were compensated for losing their property after slavery ended. That's right, they got reparations. We got nothing. So why should black Americans still be taxed, while reparations are just now being discussed? If you can write trillion-dollar checks for wars, billion-dollar tax breaks for billionaires, and emergency bailouts for banks, you can stop taxing the descendants of the enslaved until the debt is paid. Reparations without tax exemptions. That's a refund with interest. Being taxed again. It's not just unfair. It's theft on repeat. This isn't just about money. It's about what was stolen, and what that theft did to our minds, our families, our dreams. Generations of black Americans have lived with a constant sense of financial insecurity, not because we made poor choices, but because we were never given a fair chance. Imagine growing up watching your parents work 2 jobs and still not make ends meet. Watching your grandparents get denied home loans. Seeing your neighborhood stripped of grocery stores, banks, and clinics. Always being told to pull yourself up while someone keeps stepping on your fingers. That's not failure. That's sabotage. Reparations aren't just about correcting an economic imbalance. They're about healing the trauma of being told, generation after generation, that you don't matter. We've been gaslit into thinking poverty is our fault, into believing we're lucky to get by. But what if we had what we were promised? What if we weren't starting every race from the back, carrying weights? The emotional cost of systemic theft is depression, anxiety, disbelief in fairness, distrust in government, a tiredness that sits deep in the bones. Reparations are a recognition of pain and a way to begin releasing it, because justice isn't just what you owe in dollars, it's what you owe in dignity. Now let's talk about the second half of this injustice, taxes. For centuries, Black Americans have paid into a system that gave us almost nothing in return. We paid taxes that funded schools we weren't allowed to attend, roads that led to neighborhoods we were banned from living in, hospitals that let us die in the waiting room. We paid into a country that paid us nothing back. Why should a people who were robbed for generations be expected to continue funding the very system that robbed them? Reparations aren't just about a one-time payment. They're about restructuring the relationship between Black Americans and the US government. And that starts with tax justice. If the government owes you a $1.2 million debt, why are you still paying it more money every year? Black Americans should be exempt from federal income tax, at minimum. No taxation without repair. No obligation without restoration. This isn't radical, it's logical. You don't keep charging rent to the person whose house you stole. We've already paid, in labor, in life, in loss. Exempting Black Americans from taxes isn't charity. It's overdue fairness. It's time to stop asking what we owe America and start asking what it owes us. Imagine the ripple effect if Black Americans were finally paid what we are owed, $1.2 million each. This isn't just a check, it's a reset, a rebalancing of a system built to exploit us. That kind of wealth in the hands of millions would transform everything, not just Black lives, but America itself. Black families would pay off generations of debt, buy homes, start businesses, invest in education, and most importantly, we'd finally get to build wealth we can pass down, just like every other group that got a head start. Communities that have suffered from underfunding and systemic sabotage would finally have the capital to rebuild on their own terms. We could create banks that work for us, media that speaks to us, schools that teach our real history, not the whitewashed version. Healthcare outcomes would improve, crime would fall, graduation rates would rise. When people have dignity, access, and options, they thrive. When Black Americans rise, so does the nation. And remember, this wouldn't bankrupt America. It would rebuild it, equitably. Economists agree that reparations would boost GDP, stimulate spending, and close long-standing racial gaps. Justice pays dividends. This is what America has been afraid of. Not revenge, but repair. Not destruction, but Black prosperity. Let's be crystal clear. If reparations are paid, especially in the amount of $1, $2 million per Black American, then we should never pay taxes again. Why? Because we've already paid the highest tax of all. Centuries of stolen labor, stolen lives, and stolen futures. Taxes are meant to support a government that serves and protects you. But what has this government done for Black Americans? We've been taxed without representation. Taxed while our schools stay underfunded. Taxed while our communities are over-policed. Taxed while our elders die without health care. While our children drink poisoned water. And while our homes are undervalued and over-assessed. White families built wealth while paying into a system that gave back to them. We paid into the same system and got nothing but broken promises. If we finally get a payment acknowledging that theft, then we owe nothing back. This isn't about skipping responsibility, it's about fairness. Reparations aren't a handout, they're a refund. And once we've been refunded, the bill is settled. We don't owe taxes to the system that robbed us. That's justice. Never again should a black mother struggle to keep the lights on while paying taxes to a country that once auctioned off her ancestors. Never again should we fund the very institutions that oppressed us. No taxes, not until the debt is truly paid, and not just once. America wants you to believe reparations are impossible, too expensive, too complicated, too divisive. But history proves that's a lie, because reparations have been paid before, just not to us. After World War II, the US paid over $1.6 billion to Japanese Americans who were interned during the war. Not enslaved, not beaten, just wrongfully imprisoned. Germany paid billions to Holocaust survivors and continues to fund education and memorials to this day. In 2013, the UK paid over $20 million to white slave owners for loss of property, the property being enslaved Africans. The victims got nothing. The oppressors got paid. The blueprint is already there. The only difference is race. When the victims are black, suddenly it's complicated. When the pain is ours, suddenly the money runs out. But we see through that. Reparations aren't new. They're overdue. If every other group wronged by government policy can receive repayment, why not the descendants of slavery, the group that literally built the foundation of American wealth? They paid out the oppressors. We're just asking for what we're owed. This isn't about creating something new. It's about applying the same standard to black people that's already been applied to others. Let's make something radically clear. If reparations are real, if America finally admits the debt, then taxation for black Americans should end. Period. Why should descendants of the enslaved pay into a system that has extracted from them for centuries? Why should we fund the very institutions that denied us land, denied us loans, denied us justice, and denied us life? The truth is, we've been double taxed our entire existence. We paid with free labor. We paid with our lives. And now, we pay into a system that turns its back on us. No more. Reparations are not just about a payout. They're about correcting structural theft. And part of that means acknowledging that black Americans should not be expected to keep feeding the same system that's never fed them. Think about this. America offers tax exemptions for churches, corporations, and even the ultra-rich. Billionaires find loopholes, multinationals offshore profits, but black families, many still in economic survival mode, are expected to fund the empire that chained their ancestors and still benefits from their pain. A real reparations package must include tax forgiveness, past, present, and future. Not as a favor, as a matter of justice. If America finally admits the truth, then black Americans should not owe Uncle Sam another penny. Not until the debt is paid in full. Housing is the #1 way Americans build wealth. So when black families were denied fair access to home ownership, they were denied the chance to build equity, pass down property, or even live in safe neighborhoods. The result? Generations of poverty, generations of stolen opportunity, and yet America still asks, why are black people behind? Because every time they tried to build, the system tore it down. When slavery ended, America didn't stop exploiting black bodies. It just changed the uniform. The 13th Amendment says slavery is abolished, except as punishment for a crime. And that one line became the loophole that gave birth to a new form of bondage, mass incarceration. Immediately after emancipation, states across the South passed black codes, laws that made it illegal for black people to be unemployed, loiter, speak loudly in public, or walk without proof of work. Thousands were arrested, And once they were labeled as criminals, they were leased out to plantations, railroads, and corporations. This system was called convict leasing, and it was worse than slavery. Why? Because the companies leasing prisoners didn't own them. They had no incentive to keep them alive. Men, women, and even children were worked to death in mines, fields, and factories, and the profits flowed into state governments and private pockets. It never stopped. Today, the US has the largest prison population in the world, over 2 million people, and though black Americans make up only 13% of the population, they account for nearly 40% of all incarcerated people. Black men are 6 times more likely to be in prison than white men. For black women, it's twice as likely. And once you're labeled a felon, doors slam shut. You can't vote. You can't get housing. You can't get jobs. You become legally, economically, and socially erased. But here's what they never tell you. Prison is a business. Private prison companies like Core Civic and GEO Group make billions annually. Incarcerated people work for as little as 13 cents an hour, producing goods and services for government contracts and major corporations. Prison labor helps fight fires in California. It builds furniture for schools. It packages food for disaster relief, and the public barely notices or cares. In every era, the system found new ways to turn black suffering into profit. Slavery became convict leasing. Convict leasing became Jim Crow. Jim Crow became the war on drugs, and today, it's mass incarceration. This is not about crime, it's about control and capital. Because in America, a black body has always meant one thing: profit. In 2020, something unprecedented happened. Amid protests, outrage, and a global reckoning on race, one US state decided to do what the federal government has never done: take reparations seriously. California established the Reparations Task Force, the first of its kind in modern American history. Their job? To study the impact of slavery and systemic racism, and to recommend actual monetary compensation for descendants of enslaved people. What they found was devastating and undeniable. The task force determined that black Californians had suffered measurable harm in areas like housing discrimination, over-policing, mass incarceration, health disparities, and unjust property seizures. They tallied the cost, not just in trauma, but in lost economic opportunity, and their recommendation: up to $1.5 million per eligible black resident. Not for slavery alone, but for the compounded injustice that followed. Redlining, unjust prison sentencing, police violence, medical discrimination, school segregation, all of it had a cost. Critics said it was too much, too expensive, too divisive. But let's put it in perspective. The US spent $6.5 trillion on pandemic relief in under 3 years. The military budget exceeds $877 billion every single year. Banks got bailed out in 2008, not one arrest. Corporations dodge taxes, while the IRS audits poor black families. So don't say the money isn't there. California didn't just put a number on reparations, it made the conversation real. 1.5 million isn't a random figure. It's based on data, it's based on loss, and it's still less than what was stolen. This proposal is a blueprint, one every state could follow, because the harm wasn't limited to California. Black families were stripped of wealth from coast to coast. Reparations aren't about giving anything extra. They're about restoring what was taken. What California did was simple. It listened. It documented. It dared to say, yes, this is real, and it's time we pay what's owed. The only question now is, will the rest of America follow? Whenever the word reparations comes up, someone always asks the same question: who's going to pay for that? But that question is never asked when it's time to fund war, or when banks crash the economy, or when tax breaks are handed to billionaires. In 2023 alone, the US spent over $877 billion on the military. Since 2001, it's spent over $8 trillion on wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. No one asked if that was affordable, But when it comes to paying black Americans for centuries of theft, suddenly the country gets quiet. Let's be clear, reparations are not about punishing individual white people. They're about holding a nation accountable. The same government that enforced slavery, segregation, redlining, and mass incarceration can absolutely fund reparations. It's done it before. In 1988, Japanese Americans who were unjustly interned during World War II received formal apologies and $20,000 each. German Holocaust survivors were compensated by multiple European governments and continue to receive support. Even enslavers in Washington, D.C. received reparations for losing their human property, paid by the US government in 1862. So don't say it's impossible. It's been done, just not for black people. The truth is, reparations have already been paid, just not to the victims. They were paid to the perpetrators, to the companies that insured slave ships, to the railroads built on black labor, to the families who inherited stolen land. And let's talk about cost. The real cost isn't paying black Americans. The real cost is what happens when you don't. Generations of poverty, broken families, crime rooted in desperation, public health crises, education gaps, housing instability. These are not random failures. They are the long, unbroken consequences of an unpaid debt. And America pays for that every single day in policing, prisons, welfare, and lost productivity. So when people ask, who will pay? Here's the answer, we already are. We've been paying the price of injustice for over 400 years. Reparations are not an expense. They're a correction, not punishment, a promise kept. If this country can afford everything else, then it can afford to do what's right. Not all debts are financial. Some are carved into memory, into the soul of a people. What was stolen from black Americans wasn't just land, money, or opportunity. It was safety. It was rest. It was the right to just exist without fear. For over 4 centuries, black families lived under constant threat of separation, of violence, of annihilation. Mothers had their children sold. Fathers were whipped in front of their families. Entire lineages were erased with the stroke of a pen or the barrel of a gun. How do you measure the cost of generational trauma? Even today, the scars remain, not only in poverty or incarceration, but in health. Black infants are more than twice as likely to die than white infants. Black women are nearly 3 times more likely to die during childbirth. Stress-related illnesses like hypertension and heart disease are rampant. These are not genetic defects. They are the result of living under constant pressure, surveillance, and fear. It's called weathering, the physical toll of racism on the body, and it shortens black lives by decades. Imagine being told you're free, but your skin still marks you for suspicion. Imagine working twice as hard for half as much, and still being seen as lazy. Imagine losing your son to a police bullet, and watching his killer walk free. This is the emotional cost of injustice. It's not just what was done to our ancestors, it's what was inherited by their descendants. Black children are taught early how to survive encounters with police. Black parents pray harder every time their child leaves the house, and entire communities live with the psychological burden of having to prove their humanity every single day. That's the debt no one sees. The invisible tax of being black in America. Reparations aren't just about money. They're about acknowledgement, about telling the truth, about saying, we see what was done to you, we understand what it cost, and we will no longer pretend it didn't happen. Until that debt is recognized and paid, the wound will stay open. Because a country can't heal from what it refuses to name. Some people hear the number, $1.5 million, and think it's too much. But when you understand what was taken, you realize it's not even close. No amount of money can undo 400 years of violence, terror, and stolen futures. It won't bring back the lives lost in slavery, It won't rebuild the black towns burned to ashes. It won't reverse the trauma passed down like heirlooms. But it can begin something this country has never truly done. Repair. 1.5 million isn't a gift. It's not a lottery ticket. It's a receipt for unpaid labour, denied housing, stolen land, and blocked opportunity. It's the first brick in a foundation that should have been built centuries ago. Think about what $1.5 million actually means today. For many black families, it could mean finally owning a home without being gouged by predatory lenders. It could mean college tuition without drowning in debt. It could mean starting a business without needing to beg for funding from institutions that never wanted you there. It's not reparations for slavery alone. It's reparations for the aftershocks. Jim Crow, redlining, the war on drugs, mass incarceration, police brutality, medical neglect, educational sabotage. Each of these systems didn't just hurt black people. They kept them from building wealth, from passing something down, from even catching a breath. 1.5 million won't fix everything, but it would give black Americans something they've been systematically denied. Leverage. For centuries, this country has operated on stolen time and stolen bodies. It has profited from black brilliance while locking black people out of the very systems they helped build. So if we're talking numbers, 1.5 million is the floor, not the ceiling. The truth is, America will never be able to pay back the full debt. But that doesn't mean it gets to pay nothing. This isn't about making things equal overnight. It's about making them right, finally. It's about acknowledging that the wealth of this country came from unpaid hands. And now those hands are reaching out, not asking for a favor, but demanding what they're owed. This isn't just about the past. It's about the bill that's still unpaid. For every dollar in white wealth, there's a black story behind it. A story of forced labor, stolen land, burned homes, blocked loans, denied justice. They say we're asking for a handout. No, we're asking for a refund. The blood, the sweat, the brilliance, the culture, it all came from black hands. We were